I say accessibility is a quality. Universal design is an approach and inclusion is the goal. Accessibility वो क्वालिटी है जिसको हर व्यक्ति को ज़रूरत है. पानी आप तक पहुंचता है या आप पानी तक पहुंचते हो, पानी की ज़रूरत, you need access to water. तो वो एक क्वालिटी है. Why do we talk about it in a very special way? यूनिवर्सल डिज़ाइन एक अप्रोच है, एक थियोरी है, एक फिलॉसफी है और एक बहुत अच्छी थ्योरी है जो मैं ये नहीं समझ पा रहा हूँ इसका अंत कहाँ है. इसका कोई अंत नहीं है. बिकॉज आई फाइंड यूनिवर्सल डिज़ाइन इज नॉट जस्ट एप्लीकेबल टू आर्किटेक्चर, इट्स एब्सोल्युटली एप्लीकेबल टू गवर्नेंस, इट्स एब्सोल्युटली एप्लीकेबल टू लॉ, इट्स एब्सोल्युटली एप्लीकेबल टू इंफॉर्मेशन टेक्नोलॉजी. और तीसरा चीज़ है इंक्लूजन. इंक्लूजन हमारा गोल है. जब एंड में जाके जो हमारा एंड अनुभव है, एंड एक्सपीरियंस है, उसमें I feel that I'm participating, I'm part of the same society.
Hello and welcome to the India Autism Center podcast. We are at the International Purple Fest in Goa and I have a very, very special guest with me here today. Dr. Professor Gaurav Raheja, the man behind the Harmonized Guidelines 2021, the man who has taught India what really is accessibility in the built environment. But we will talk to him on whether India has really become accessible, कि कानून खाली कागज पे ही रह गया है. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us.
Thank you, Nipun.
Professor Raheja, you were obviously an architecture student and then you ended up studying more, becoming a doctor. You're a professor at IIT Roorkee today. It's not really typical for somebody to get interested in accessibility in the built environment. India में तो accessibility पर have नहीं जाता in most architecture colleges, if I'm not wrong, correct? What motivated you to get into this field?
So I think first of all, to begin with, I want to deeply acknowledge and thank Nipun for having me for this chat. And I think situated in 2025 in the 21st century, I believe and I hope this conversation becomes a model of education. That conversations can also have something as content. So taking it forward, the question what brought me here into this space is also a narrative and a little quick story. 2000 year was the new millennium and I got admission for my master's in IIT Roorkee. 10 months down the line, I was thinking of my thesis topic, and which was going to be about information technology in architecture as a person driven by technology at that time. I ended up into a conversation with a professor who hired me for some visual communication services for a school for children with deafness on our campus. And I incidentally happened to design something which they liked. The minister came to inaugurate. And I got a beautiful invitation to sit in that audience and witness that function. I must admit, acknowledge, I never forget that day because that was the turning point of my life. Somebody who had scripted a half thesis title in information technology cried in that audience, became emotional when I saw children with hearing impairments dancing on national patriotic songs, responding to questions of teachers on what is a mango and what is an apple, who has never heard an alphabet. And my goosebumps were about, what am I doing in this world? I had absolutely no idea that such a world existed. Even though I still question, why did I not have an idea? I sometimes seriously question, because already by that time I was an architect who was very much inclined to set up a practice, who was intending towards looking at great masters, which I still admire and kind of feel inspired about. But I think that was the day something happened inside. I did not know if I will be able to do anything, but one thing I realized is that if in my lifetime, if even one life could do better, I think that life would be worth living. So I chose a perspective that, and also I was interested all the time in a visual world, which is about visual communication. I was sensitive to it, even though I was not trained for it. So I think that was the day I was determined. And eventually I chose my first thesis topic, which was perhaps one of the earliest in my institution, which was titled as Designing for the Disabled. And I know in order to immerse myself into that and keep my passion of visual communication alive, I first made a film on disability, which was 1.5 minute film with no knowledge of filmmaking. But I think that film which I made for myself gave me tears myself. And at that time, I kind of used that as a narrative to explain what this whole thing means. Books were rare, resources were very minimal, internet was very new, but I think all that combined together was this question, what can we do? So I think we grappled. Those days were red line buses in Delhi. I moved around, and institutions I must acknowledge at that time was today's ADI, and at that time Spastic Society of Northern India were my lighthouses to start giving me some direction that what institutions, schools like them are doing, and start asking this question that what is really accessibility? And many a times, I must again admit, I was posed tough questions by juries or people who interviewed me. What will you do? This is the way it is. And I know I was very docile and I could only answer it in a very fumbling voice. That, sir, only if you give me a chance, I will hope
But
I
what
can
is
do.
designed for the disabled?
Sorry?
What is designed for the disabled?
Well, that was the starting conversation at that
No, but
time.
maybe today, what is designed for the disabled for you?
Well, today I would not even prefer to use that term, but if I have to use that term,
What would you use today?
today I would use design for inclusion, design for diversity. I would
What is
not
design for
even,
inclusion?
I would not even use the word barrier-free design, but that is part of the history of evolution.
Fair enough. And then your journey started. But
That's where the journey
talking
started.
contemporarily, what
Yeah.
do you think is design for inclusion?
So, design for inclusion, I would say, is any piece of design that you assume is meant for the human society to be done, not for a customization or a particular specific need, but for a wider section, I would say is what design for inclusion.
Can you explain it through one or two examples, maybe,
Okay.
instead of talking theoretically? Because I think
The way I would like to explain it is it would still be very specific because these are two generic terms. When I say design for disabled, today you would say there are 21 categories of disabilities. Does it cater to all 21? Well, so sometimes the context will become slightly overlapping. Let me explain it through one of those examples. Today, for example, you have chairs that you use in front of the computers. They also have wheels. You don't call them wheelchairs, even though they are on the wheels. But there, the purpose of the wheel is giving you freedom to move,
to move around in that.
right?
Yeah.
To give you rotation.
Tilt. Yeah.
And in addition to that wheel, there is an adjustable position in it which also adjusts your height. Now, if you say, who is that chair designed for? You cannot cater one particular person. It is for any person who needs it, wants to move it around, offers a principle of flexibility in that design. And I think, irrespective of your table height, the chair can adjust itself. I would call it an example of inclusion, which does not also make it feel special. So I think that is one of the ways to explain what design in an inclusive way in a furniture context could be. In a built environment context, let's say I would talk of a street crossing. A street crossing which you can cross without lifting your leg even 1 millimeter. What would that mean? It would mean level crossing. A level crossing on which a pregnant mother can walk, a baby stroller can go, a wheelchair can go, a person with vision impairment can walk, and all others, whether with chappals or with even bare feet, can walk. The entire India can cross that crossing. And that is, to me, an inclusive crossing. So in that way, I think we can explain the idea that it is not specialized for a particular section of society, but this is one way you can do that. And if I can put it even more simpler, I think hopefully our country would respect and like that. My personal experience of one of the wonderful inclusive environments would be the places around India Gate. India Gate is perhaps one of the only examples that I know of which has a curb-free street. You don't have to lift even 1 cent of your feet. And the second beauty of inclusion that you enjoy there is people need nothing. They just need blank spaces for recreation and leisure. And you see the poorest of the poor, eldest of the elder, youngest of the younger, women in saris, women in jeans, men in trousers, foreigners in blazers, and all spectrum of society coming together, I think explains to me wonderfully what inclusion truly means in a built environment.
I'm glad you said that, what India Gate. I remember I'd gone to New York a few years back. और मैं अपनी व्हीलचेयर चला के मुझे इतना मजा आ रहा था कि मेरी बैटरी खत्म हो गई व्हीलचेयर की आफ्टर
Right.
एंड दैट्स नेवर हैपेंड इन इंडिया बिकॉज इन इंडिया यू कांट रियली व्हील अराउंड cities etc.
In fact, I had a chance to take some officials from Mumbai to for some training in Europe, including with the Swiss Railways and the German Deutsche Bahn systems. And after that trip, one of my experiences, and many of them were actually senior officials, they said, well, it was very nice and very interesting. And I only asked them, sir, it was only nice you could walk today more than 15,000 steps without any oofs and ifs because you did not have to lift your leg even 1 centimeter. Now, this I believe is something which I set as a benchmark and also a roadmap for our country, which is quite large in its length and its width. And can we do that in an harmonized, inclusive, and an accessible way?
So when you actually start working on accessibility, it's actually not only going to help people with disabilities or people with temporary injuries, pregnant women, elderly, ये सब तो बोला जाता है, but anybody is what you're saying.
Everybody also.
Like you gave in this example. Oh.
Yes. That is the intent. And which is why, if I can add to this conversation, our journey started with people with disabilities. Today we say it has opened from the river to the ocean of diversity. Disability itself is one of the representations of diversity, within which there are different classifications. And second thing, I think we always see it from the lens of law, but we can see from the lens of humanity also, that law says 40% is the condition to call you a benchmark disability, but you can be, let's say, 38% disabled. And I would say, and I have been raising this question to myself, what if you give me a chemistry question today? You would reflect my 100% disability in that subject. So I think the question of ability is also very contextual. It is never a static concept, and this is something I try to explain, but I'm all the time explaining it to myself, that when this is so dynamic, this is a fairly complex problem to address. So therefore, we need a very careful approach to address this, and which requires seasoned understanding, a polished professionalism, and at the same time, a strong empathetic heart to kind of continue this movement forward.
And universal design is a solution to that, right? Which is the buzzword which people keep hearing, I'm sure.
Which one?
Universal design is the solution to that, which is the buzzword people keep talking about.
So,
but I'm sure a lot of people would not even understand what is universal design.
Yeah. So I think for the benefit of the audience, I can speak it both in English and in Hindi. I will first say it in English to kind of clarify this. And this is just my understanding. I say accessibility is a quality. Universal design is an approach. And inclusion is the goal. तीनों शब्दों में बहुत क्लैरिटी होने की जरूरत है. एक्सेसिबिलिटी वो क्वालिटी है जिसको हर व्यक्ति को जरूरत है. पानी आप तक पहुंचता है या आप पानी तक पहुंचते हो, पानी की जरूरत, यू नीड एक्सेस टू वाटर. तो वो एक क्वालिटी है. व्हाई डू वी टॉक अबाउट इट इन अ वेरी स्पेशल वे? यूनिवर्सल डिजाइन एक अप्रोच है, एक थ्योरी है, एक फिलॉसफी है, और एक बहुत अच्छी थ्योरी है जो मैं ये नहीं समझ पा रहा हूँ इसका अंत कहाँ है. इसका कोई अंत नहीं है. बिकॉज आई फाइंड यूनिवर्सल डिजाइन इज नॉट जस्ट एप्लीकेबल टू आर्किटेक्चर, इट्स एब्सोल्युटली एप्लीकेबल टू गवर्नेंस, इट्स एब्सोल्युटली एप्लीकेबल टू लॉ, इट्स एब्सोल्युटली एप्लीकेबल टू इंफॉर्मेशन टेक्नोलॉजी. और तीसरा चीज है इंक्लूजन. इंक्लूजन हमारा गोल है. जब एंड में जाके जो हमारा एंड अनुभव है, एंड एक्सपीरियंस है, उसमें आई फील दैट आई एम पार्टिसिपेटिंग, आई एम पार्ट ऑफ द सेम सोसाइटी. और कई बार इस वजह से मुझे ये भी कहना पड़ता है दैट समटाइम्स फुलफिलिंग ऑल द material aspects is not necessary that you're still achieving inclusion, because inclusion में आपको आपका मन, आपकी सोसाइटी, आपका समाज, आपका थॉट प्रोसेस, आपकी कल्चर को भी एक्सेसिबल होना पड़ेगा, ना सिर्फ कि one sector of information or another sector of assistance. Because, and which is why when we created our laboratory of inclusive design, we titled it, after a lot of debates and took around 6 months to confirm, we said from independence to inclusion. Because most often the idea of accessibility is talking about giving independence and dignity to people with disabilities, but inclusion as a larger goal, I think is a big responsibility, which is not just one person's responsibility or one organization. समाज को तो बहुत काम करना पड़ेगा इसके ऊपर. and which is why I think this conversation is fairly important.
But if you have to explain to a common man what is universal design, कैसे समझेंगे?
Fair enough. So देखिए, आम इंसान को लगेगा ये ज्ञान की बात है और ये ज्ञान जो कि अप्लाई
प्रोफेसर रही बात बहुत अच्छी कर रहे हैं, पर बहुत लोगों को ये लगेगा भी
नहीं लगने दीजिए फिर। लेकिन आपको ये समझना पड़ेगा कि कोई चीज को प्रोफेशनली समझना है तो एक बार तो समझना पड़ेगा। गीता का ज्ञान भी एक बार तो समझना पड़ेगा, उसके लिए लड़ने से तो कुछ नहीं होगा। मैं आपको फिर ये समझा देता हूं। उसमें यूनिवर्सल डिजाइन की थ्योरी में 7 प्रिंसिपल्स हैं और उसको हमने इंडिया के लिए परिभाषित किया 2011 में अंडर द गाइडेंस ऑफ प्रोफेसर अबीर मलिक, हु वाज पार्ट ऑफ द यूनिवर्सल डिजाइन मूवमेंट इन द यूएस। तो पहले मैं इंडिया प्रिंसिपल्स की बात कर लेता हूं, उसके बाद में उन 7 प्रिंसिपल्स के कुछ उदाहरण देके एग्जाम्पल्स दे देता हूं। पहला हमने जो उसमें कॉन्टेक्स्ट ऐड किया था कल्चरल अप्रोप्रिएटनेस, जिसके बारे में हम अमूमन बात नहीं करते। फॉर एग्जाम्पल, हमारी चेयर्स, हमारा जो खाने की व्यवस्था है, और अभी हम अगर बात करें तो हो सकता है हम एक सेक्शन ऑफ सोसाइटी की बात करें, बट अगर आप लार्जर इंटरेस्ट में बात करें तो उसमें रूरल इंडिया भी आता है, जिसकी हम अक्सर बात नहीं करते। तो आप ये अगर देखें कि हमारे देश में खाना कैसे खाया जाता है, क्या सब लोगों के पास डाइनिंग टेबल या चेयर होता है? नहीं होता है। बहुत से लोग ज़मीन पे भी बैठ के खाते हैं। तो अब ये चीज़ कल्चरल कॉन्टेक्स्ट है। तो उस कल्चरल कॉन्टेक्स्ट में ज़मीन, आई फील, वॉज अ वेरी गुड इक्विटेबल वे ऑफ डाइनिंग, where everybody was at the same level, and this was coming from our cultural practices, but we never acknowledged it as a universal design idea. तो हम यूनिवर्सल डिजाइन का ये मतलब नहीं है कि आपको कुछ नया ही करना है और रोज नया करना है। इट इज ऑल्सो टू एक्सेप्ट सम ऑफ आवर ट्रेडिशनल प्रैक्टिसेस, जिसमें दूसरा उदाहरण हम साड़ी और धोती का देते हैं। साड़ी एक वो फॉर्म है जो मदर और डॉटर शेयर करते थे, धोती वो फॉर्म है जो फादर और सन शेयर करते थे। वन साइज विच कुड कस्टमाइज टू फिट ऑल। आई एम नॉट सेइंग वन साइज फिट ऑल, but we never look back into history thinking that it is obsolete. So universal design का परिचायक ये है कि इन principles को आप आगे लेके जाइए। और मैं आपसे हर चीज में अब ये सवाल पूछ सकता हूँ, क्या आपके हर सिस्टम के अंदर जैसे अगर आप एक छोटा सा उदाहरण ले लीजिए, फुटपाथ क्या कल्चरली अप्रोप्रिएट है? और मैं उसमें उदाहरण देता हूँ, जो महिलाएं साड़ी पहन के और कोल्हापुरी चप्पल पहन के जाती हैं, उनके लिए फुटपाथ बहुत मुश्किल है चलना, क्योंकि आपके अनड्यूलेशंस बहुत है, सीमेंटिशियस ग्राउंड है, और उसके अलावा जब लेवल्स ज़्यादा हो जाते हैं आपके 150 मिलीमीटर से और भी ज़्यादा, तो दे आर ऑल्सो रिफ्लेक्सिंग प्रॉब्लम्स इन योर मसल्स, विच इज़ नॉट अ इक्विटेबल रेंज। तो एक प्रिंसिपल से आप एक्चुअली 2 जगह पे हिट कर रहे हैं। तो आइडिया यूनिवर्सल डिज़ाइन का ये नहीं है कि आप मत कीजिए, मत पढ़िए उसको, लेकिन आप ये डिराइव तो कर सकते हैं ना उससे कि कहाँ समस्या आई। So it is a tool which can be considered theoretically, but theoretical frameworks are the basis on the basis of which your new technologies are developing. अब यही चीज को अगर आप फोन के उसमें देख लें, तो दूसरा एग्जांपल मैं आपको देता हूं, बियॉन्ड कल्चरल अप्रोप्रिएटनेस इज द आइडिया ऑफ इकोनॉमिक अफोर्डेंस, जो कि उन 7 प्रिंसिपल्स में नहीं था। हम इंडिया में ये बात कहना चाहते हैं कि जब तक इंडिया में इकोनॉमिक अफोर्डेंस की बात नहीं होगी, वो इंडिया के लिए यूनिवर्सल डिजाइन नहीं है। आज आप असिस्टिव टेक्नोलॉजी में देख लीजिए कितने डिवाइसेस हैं, while there is amazing work that has been carried out both by India as a country as well as India through collaboration and innovation with various organizations, and amazing work, there is absolutely no denial about it. But the question is, क्या आज आपके गांव में जितने दिव्यांगजन हैं who might still be confined to their home environments, क्या उनके पास अफोर्डेंस है उस तक पहुंचने की? क्या उस वजह से हम उनको मेन स्ट्रीम में ला पाए हैं? क्या वो इंक्लूडेड हो गए हैं? आई वुड से अगर नहीं भी हुए हैं तो हमें ये तो दिख गया है कि ये रास्ता है। तो अब हमें वी हैव टू वर्क ऑन मेकिंग इकोनॉमिक अफोर्डेंस अ पार्ट ऑफ असिस्टिव टेक्नोलॉजी, जिसमें 2 रास्ते हैं आपके पास। या तो बाई टेक्नोलॉजी को बाई इटसेल्फ आप सस्ता कर लीजिए, या फिर आप फाइनेंशियल इंस्टीट्यूशंस या ऐसे मॉडल्स बनाइए गवर्नेंस के जिससे रीच पेनिट्रेट हो। सो देयरफॉर आई से यूनिवर्सल डिजाइन का एप्लीकेशन, क्योंकि उसमें 2 शब्द डिजाइन और यूनिवर्सल लिखा है, तो कई बार हम उसकी बाउंड्री बना देते हैं, विच इज नॉट ट्रू। I therefore see, and I am saying it from the world of practice, not from the world of theory, that if this could be becoming a practice of law, for example, universal design की प्रैक्टिस की वजह से या उसकी थ्योरी की वजह से, अगर आप सोचिए आज आपको वेब कास्टिंग के थ्रू सारे लीगल जजमेंट्स मिल रहे हैं, तो ये एक्सेस बढ़ रहा है ना। और ये इसमें टेक्नोलॉजी कारगर हो रही है, तो आई वुड से आवर जुडिशरी इज ऑल्सो फॉलोइंग यूनिवर्सल डिजाइन, वेदर इट रीड्स यूनिवर्सल डिजाइन और नॉट डजंट मैटर. और तीसरा प्रिंसिपल जो मैं इंडिया के कॉन्टेक्स्ट से बता देता हूँ, जहां पे इट मूव्स बियॉन्ड द आइडिया ऑफ डिजाइन फॉर डिसेबल्ड, इज द आइडिया ऑफ एस्थेटिक्स. हर इंसान की अभिव्यक्ति को अगर हम आज़ादी देते हैं, उस आज़ादी में एक सुंदरता भी है, उस आज़ादी में उसकी आइडेंटिटी भी है, और उस आइडेंटिटी को बरकरार रखने के लिए हमें डिज़ाइन को एक फ्रॉम एन एस्थेटिक लेंस देखने में कोई परेशानी नहीं होनी चाहिए, जिसको अमूमन हम लोग थियोरेटिकली रिजेक्ट कर देते हैं कि आप प्रैक्टिकल बात कीजिए, एस्थेटिक्स में कुछ नहीं रखा. और रियलिटी ये है, अगर आज एस्थेटिक्स नहीं होता तो स्पेक्टिकल जैसी चीज़ लेंस कार्ड तक नहीं पहुंचती. आज जिनके पास चश्मा नहीं भी है, वो चश्मा लगाना चाहते हैं क्योंकि उस चश्मे में रंग दिखते हैं, पर्सनैलिटी दिखती है, एंड पीपल आर ट्राइंग टू अडॉप्ट इट. And I would say spectacle is one of the most wonderful examples of universal design, which if you remember 20 years ago, we would read a matrimonial alliance and where it would be written, a bespectacled groom required for a bespectacled bride. And today, if you think the matrimonial alliance has removed the word spectacle, should be congratulated onto the story of inclusion. By virtue of universal design as a principle, somebody has followed it. So it is not about this literature. Of course, one need not be interested in it, but I would say as a professor,
That's a great example you've given. Yeah.
Right.
It's become cool to wear glasses as well. Yeah.
Also on the other side, like both of us are wearing a smartwatch, and incidentally, while both of us are wearing a smartwatch, we have chosen an analog way of representation.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Right. So this is personalization. It's an example of universal design principle number 2 called flexibility in use. It is flexible while it is fixed. This strap is flexible. I can tighten it. I can loosen it. तो यूनिवर्सल डिजाइन देखिए, थ्योरी का माध्यम, जिसको कई बार हम समझते हैं, बहुत बहुत एलर्जी है हम लोगों को इस वर्ड थ्योरी से, जबकि मैं ये कहना चाहता हूँ थ्योरी से ही आपकी डेप्थ बढ़ेगी. जब तक आपकी एक इंसान की समझ नहीं बढ़ेगी, तो एज दे से थ्योरी विदाउट एक्शन इज यूजलेस, एंड एक्शन विदाउट थ्योरी इज ऑल्सो अ स्टूपिड एक्ट. सो देयरफॉर द आइडिया ऑफ थ्योरी इज नॉट कि ज्ञान बांटना है, बट आइडिया ऑफ थ्योरी इज कि क्या हमारी कल्चर, हमारी सोसाइटी अगर इस बात को समझ ले, चाहे बिना थ्योरी के, I would say we will congratulate and we will perhaps have not those problems that we face in the name of attitude. For example, you create an accessible space, and if I can further go on to this word footpath, many a times this analogy is given कि फुटपाथ हम बड़ा इसलिए नहीं बनाएंगे या उसमें ये सब इसलिए नहीं करेंगे क्योंकि हमें डर है कि जो लोग गाड़ियां चला रहे हैं वो उसके ऊपर चला देंगे. अब इसका मतलब यही है ना कि जो गाड़ी चला रहे हैं उन्होंने यूनिवर्सल डिजाइन थ्योरी नहीं समझा है. They are doing this act, and because of this act, many other pedestrians are losing their right to move. Many people who are wheelchair users or baby strollers or mothers who are kind of pregnant in that are therefore not even choosing to walk on those footpaths because we fear the vehicle owners. तो इसका मतलब ये शिक्षा तो देने की जरूरत है ना. And I would hope maybe some radio channel does it so that people who drive for 2 hours in big cities get this gyan and perhaps changes the driving behavior.
आपने एक बिजनेस आइडिया दे दिया आज कोई ना कोई रेडियो चैनल को.
So there are few other principles which are important. I'll just take 2 or 3 of them. One very important principle is tolerance for error. Now, for a person with disability, I think we all know it is not a situation that you yourself created. It was a situation which happened either by accident or congenitally or any other reason. Now, if there is an error that happens, let's say in the slipping, you slip on the floor, the idea is, should you be penalized for that? Today we are talking also about errors that we make in making a building. What is a penalization? While for that there is an effort being made out from the Supreme Court, Honorable Supreme Court, on non-negotiable standards, the question is, the principle of tolerance for error is an important principle which is very well explained in our computer science by Control Z. आप गलती करते हैं तो आप उसे रिमूव भी कर सकते हैं उस एरर को. यही प्रिंसिपल हम एक्सेप्ट करना चाहते हैं इन आवर एवरीडे लाइफ. इज एन इंपॉर्टेंट यूनिवर्सल डिजाइन प्रिंसिपल. द सेकंड प्रिंसिपल which one can actually test is the principle of low physical effort. Few days back I was traveling by Delhi Metro. Delhi Metro has made some wonderful staircases और हर riser के ऊपर लिखा है कितने कैलोरीज आप बर्न करते हैं if you climb up, right? And amazingly, at least the times when I traveled, I found only 2 or 3 people going by the staircase and majority by escalator. What does it prove? The theory is actually derived that most people do not want to put physical effort, and low physical effort is a part of universal design theory, because you don't want people to make an effort. So I always start saying, why do you even reduce the levels? Make entries step free. In every building, my personal perspective is at least one entry must be step free, and that should be the main entry. This is the second principle. I have also few principles to add to the current universal design theory, and one of them, which I hope will be associated with majority world, is principle of low cognitive effort. मैं हर चीज में अपना दिमाग इतना ज्यादा क्यों लगाऊं? एक मोबाइल के अंदर करीब 50, 60, 100 apps हैं, and you can also find out in your mobile apps how many apps do you actually use daily, right? और जो apps कभी कभी यूज करता हूँ वो मैं पीछे रखता हूँ, कुछ मैं आगे रखता हूँ. And then in each app there are further other things. I don't want to name any particular company for that, but there are some apps I'm reluctant to use because they require so much of effort. ये होगा, OTP आएगा, उसके बाद ये करना है, उसके साथ मैप इंटीग्रेट करना है, including for that matter I will use the term Google Maps. Now Google Maps may have made life easier in some cases, but they have also made life complex in some cases. Especially as a pedestrian, when you walk with luggage, your one hand is actually as if you don't have one hand, because you're constantly glued to that. Second, you're putting a luggage, and then you're waiting to give the cognition whether you're walking in the right direction. And I know for many times I have failed to achieve the same alignments. And then you realize low cognition is also a requirement. कोई आदमी बहुत ज़्यादा दिमाग हर चीज़ में नहीं लगाना चाहता. So to make your entire interaction design, UI, UX, user interface, user experience better, you need principle of universal design towards low cognitive efforts also. So these are few examples through which I think the idea of inclusion can carry forward.
I think you've given a great masterclass on universal design that way.
Thank you.
But I want to move forward from that.
Sure.
You were one of the architects of the harmonized guidelines in 2016, and then they were updated again in 2021. These were post the RPWD Act, and they're legally binding as well. But one of the biggest challenges faced is, of course, implementation, in terms of the fact that there are a lot of litigations going on, etc. But there is also this perception in the private sector that it costs a lot to make something accessible to persons with disabilities. What is the incremental cost to make a building accessible to persons with disabilities? For somebody, so maybe a CEO of a company who's watching this.
Yeah, first I want to make a small correction. I was instrumental, thanks to National Institute of Urban Affairs and to the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, which entrusted this responsibility on me, and along with my team, which is acknowledged in the harmonized guidelines. So it's a teamwork which was involved in the whole process of development of that, number one. The second point, while they are legally binding, the question, the ground reality and in terms of costs. So I think it is a given that there will always be cost of something. The discourse is on whether this cost is towards a benefit or this cost is a pain to people.
You know, the reason why I'm asking you this question, because I think there's a business case for a corporate to make their building accessible.
So surely. So I think, this thing, first of all, requires wider consultations and dialogues. And so far, unfortunately, nobody has approached me for it. And I want to touch upon real estate sector for this reason very, very strongly. So there are, I would say, two perspectives. One is the perspective of innovation, and second is the perspective of defense. The defense perspective is कि cost बहुत ज़्यादा है, so let's wait जब तक law आएगा, कुछ non-negotiable होगा, कुछ हम बीच का रास्ता निकाल के कुछ कर लेंगे. दूसरा sector is about innovation. What can I do incrementally in which the cost can also be slightly looked into a telescopic way? Because there are two things. I have been making these slides very, very often, that either there is a cost that you pay or there is a price that you pay. The price that we pay is of everyday discomfort, everyday inconvenience, and everyday anxiety. Few days back, I was in the city of Gurgaon and was attending an event where I was invited to talk. I heard the mother and the daughter. The mother gave the speech, and I was very happy that the institution invited them as civic stakeholders on their experience of accessibility in a city. The mother cried for 6 minutes in her wobbling voice to explain why can't my city provide me these basic amenities, and people tell me aap America chale jao. Right? It's a very hurting statement. Now the question is, who should bear this cost that she can climb down her real estate building, move onto the footpaths, and enjoy a leisurely evening walk? The discourse that we have to talk about, and if I can borrow from Prathamesh, this conversation is about setting the priority. And let us do the equation of costing, and within which we have to split between history and future. The history is, जो बिल्डिंग्स ऑलरेडी बन चुकी हैं उनको हमें एक अलग तरह की कैटेगरी में ट्रीट करना होगा. उसमें ऑफ कोर्स वी हैव टू बी सेंसिटिव, रैशनल, रीजनेबल अकोमोडेशन, एवरीथिंग.
आपके हार्मोनाइज्ड गाइडलाइंस में कोई दो कैटेगरीज नहीं थी फॉर एग्जिस्टिंग एंड न्यू?
देखिए, हार्मोनाइज्ड गाइडलाइंस आर ऑलवेज अबाउट विद इफेक्ट फ्रॉम दिस डेट, राइट, विच इज द लॉ टू डिसाइड. हमने तो उस गाइडलाइन में जहां तक हमसे हो सका एंड विद ऑल स्टेक होल्डर्स ऑन डायलॉग ये तय किया.
And I'm purposely not getting into details of the guidelines क्योंकि फिर हम 4 घंटे के लिए बैठे रहेंगे यहाँ.
नहीं, 4 घंटे नहीं बैठना है, लेकिन ये बात समझना जरूरी है क्योंकि चीजें डिटेल में नहीं समझेंगे तो कई बारी इंप्रेशंस सिर्फ लिप सर्विस पे. वॉज टू फर्स्ट एक्नॉलेज कि हमें इतनी स्पेस की जरूरत है. कब तक हम उस चीज के ऊपर हिपोक्रेसी करते रहेंगे कि और टॉयलेट के दरवाजे को बड़ा नहीं बनाएंगे? इफ दैट इज अ कॉस्ट देन बेटर पे इट. So my question actually to this whole stakeholder business is that wherever the costs are higher, then we have to first do a calculation for a project-based cost. And then we have to work out business models to work around it. But if you start saying it right from the beginning, आज फिर escalators क्यों लग रहे हैं? क्यों दो escalators?
नहीं, Professor Reja, the reason I was asking this question is that, for example, since you mentioned the real estate sector,
Yes.
if there's some big real estate company that are working into something, what is the incremental cost when you're developing a new project to make it accessible? Is it 2%, 3%,
So
10%, 1%?
I think
you are the expert. That's what I'm asking.
That is true. So there are also one more thing onto it is the degree of accessibility. So for basic services of accessibility, I do not think cost should go between more than 1 to 2%. But if you want to heighten the degree of accessibility, sometimes with some very additional provisions, it may go up to even 3 to 4%. But those cases we have to first establish and classify. We do not have any such public domain study available. But definitely, if any real estate sector is interested, this can be done on a calculation. But my other point here is the real estate sector can spin it off in a different way by also earning a revenue in a long term through those services, because building is supposed to last 100 years, if not more. While a technology is lasting for 1 year and you're changing the technology every year while you're paying for that cost. For example, you're buying an iPhone which is worth like 1.5 lakh rupees, and you're ready to pay that price, which is also going to be finishing like in 3 years or 4 years. You buy another technology. Likewise, if you see building, the problem is we are not doing a scaling concept, because we are the same country which used to invest, if I can take names of brands like Bajaj Chetak scooters and Godrej Almiras, while they were always expensive, they were long lasting. The question is, for a long lasting investment, the problem is it's a correction of perspective. If I can add to this, हम लोग घर खरीदते हैं, I'm adding consciously onto this, 2000 रुपए के प्रोडक्ट पे हमें रिटर्न बैक गारंटी मिलती है, प्रोडक्ट भी वापस दे देते हैं और हम इतना एनालिसिस करते हैं. लेकिन 2 करोड़ के घर के ऊपर हम ये सवाल भी नहीं पूछ सकते कि 2 करोड़ में मुझे क्या गारंटी मिल रही है, कि मेरी जिंदगी की तो कोई गारंटी नहीं है, आगे क्या हो जाए मुझे, तो क्या ये घर मेरे साथ रहेगा या मैं उसी घर में फंस जाऊंगा. And these questions I feel are important questions to be asked, and I don't think it's a matter of cost. It's a matter of understanding. और जहां तक cost कम करनी है, तो that is why I'm saying let's invest in R&D. Let's do the innovation to bring down the cost. Are you not bringing the new SUV cars? Are you not paying a premium for a airbag? Do you ask these questions there? You don't ask it there. And I feel real estate is a highly compromised sector on this thing, both from the social side and also from the citizen side, that these are tough questions which must come on to some dialogue and table so that it makes a good business case. I would say, is there any warranty plan in a 2 crore rupee apartment? No. And I ask this question, why not? आप ISI मार्क की बात करते हैं, व्हील चेयर के लिए करते हैं, हर चीज के लिए स्टैंडर्ड करते हैं, क्यों बिल्डिंग के लिए नहीं करते? And everybody struggles, let's say a slip in the bathroom. मैं ये नहीं कह रहा कि आप सबको लगा के दीजिए, लेकिन प्रोविजन तो दीजिए कि कल को अगर कुछ हो जाए तो मैं उसको accessible, adaptable बना सकूं.
You know, you've worked for decades in the sector, but even I've been working for more than a decade at least. You obviously are much older than me, have more experience. I'm younger, cooler. you're more intellectual. So, we both have our own strengths.
I don't agree of more intellectual. I don't know the scale, right?
But no, that was a joke, of course.
Yes.
But I look at disability more from a law and policy point of view, and you're obviously looking at it from a more of a design point of view. One of the reasons why I think the harmonized guidelines have not been implemented and these challenges happen is that even though the RPWD Act has them, no state has changed their building bylaws to
Right.
put in all this in place.
Right.
Do you think that is the bottleneck? Because like even today in Delhi, like you're saying that for new buildings, it's obviously easier. There are new builder flats that are coming up every day and they are not accessible to people with disabilities.
Again, we come back to this. In our country, most people say theory is a useless idea. तो किताब क्यों खोल ली? Right? While किताब has the story for your own future. मत खोलिए किताब. लेकिन the point is, जब आपकी इसी बिल्डिंग में जब बाद में challenges आते हैं, which we have seen in so many cases, including a case where Honorable Supreme Court had to intervene by giving orders to demolish the whole structure. It happened in Noida, right? Why did that happen? Because a law was perhaps on the fringe of some violation, which took so many years for us to realize it.
We've also had a Supreme Court Chief Justice recently who could not vacate his government house because he could not find an accessible house for his daughters.
So now that we know this, I am only trying to raise this as a question and inquiry. And definitely, I am not expecting overnight things will happen. All guidelines, please understand the word is guideline. Because guideline gives you the leeway that you can do some customization. It is not a whip in the hand. And it is in a very constructive way it has been written. This point, if it has not been implemented...
But do you think we now need the whip approach with mandatory things in the building bylaws? Well, the Rajiv Raturi judgment actually talks about minimum standards that are going to come up.
It's the same thing like in education. जब एक ज़माना था कि बच्चा काम नहीं करता था तो थोड़ा बहुत आप उसको पहले समझाते थे, उसके बाद आपको कभी कोई ऐसा strong action लेना पड़ता था. तो I believe for those who are truly naughty and notorious, you need to strengthen up the law. After all, we are answerable to the citizens of this country. And for those who are behaving well, I think you can also give them compensation and give them some encouragement. And that approach is always an approach of governance. तो इसको फ्री हैंड तो नहीं दिया जा सकता, इसीलिए लॉ को स्टेप इन करना जरूरी है, क्योंकि हम मोरालिटी का लॉ को तो फॉलो नहीं कर पा रहे, तो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल लॉ को तो फॉलो करें. एंड इन दैट लाइट आई थिंक वी हैव टू बिल्ड द होल नेटवर्क ऑफ इकोसिस्टम. इंडिया कैन बी मैप्ड वेरी इजीली इन द सेंस कहाँ पे कौन सा लॉ चल रहा है. And I believe if we can come together on this plane to find a constructive way of guiding this thing and map it on a dashboard. Let's say whatever number of states today India has, her state mein kaun se bylaws action. What we found in fact in yesterday's one of the presentations in this Purple Fest also is different states are today subscribing to different bylaws. And those different bylaws are subscribing to some different guidelines. तो अभी तक unification तो वहाँ भी नहीं हुआ है. When we are today talking about one nation and one everything, I think this is high time we talk about it.
One nation, one accessibility. Yeah.
Absolutely. Right? One nation, one citizen, one this thing. While we appreciate that we have diversity of people, we have diversity of geographical conditions. और जहाँ पे वहाँ genuine challenges आएंगे, I think the word reasonable accommodation in a rational way should work. We do not say that this is a guideline and it is to be followed in a blind way. It has to be followed in a conscious way. And those leeways will happen in contextual cases. It cannot be generalized again.
Right. But आपने ISI standard की बात की थी,
right,
जिससे मुझे एक बात याद आई कि इंडिया में accessibility auditors बहुत हैं. Now when a company wants to become accessible or any government officer also thinks of making something accessible, the first step they will do is that go to an accessibility auditor.
Right.
And I've also got this feedback. I don't do accessibility audits anymore as a disclaimer. Right. That there are companies that have told me that we went to two auditors. एक ने 10,000 रुपए का कोड दिया, एक ने 7 lakhs का कोड दिया. और ये भी जरूरी नहीं है 7 लाख वाले की क्वालिटी बहुत अच्छी और 10,000 वाले की
जरूरी नहीं है.
There is no standard in terms of pricing. There is no standard in terms of quality. There is no standard format. I mean, tomorrow if two people go to two different chartered accountants for a balance sheet, yes, the same accounting principles will be followed.
Absolutely.
Why is there such a difference when it comes to accessibility?
Yeah, I think देखिए इसको थोड़ा सा ये समझने की ज़रूरत है, and I will use medical terminology to explain this with the perspective of I have to use my acronym of my own school DPS, that there are 3 parts to it. One is diagnose, second is prescribe, and third is surgery, right? So accessibility audit can be only done at a diagnostic level, where I only do some checkings and evaluations. It can also lead me to prescriptions that I tell you what are the interventions. And third, it can also become an inclusive service as surgery कि मैं आपको कर भी दूं वो चीजें. Now, therefore, I feel this cost difference would come. But problem is, I think our clients are not aware, first of all. Before we take it on to excess auditors, the problem brief has to be given by what is the scope of my work. And to draft that scope of work, you are entitled to ask for certain specific diagnostic things. The challenge is many clients do not have budgets. So they quote it very openly. आप excess audit कर दीजिए. For them, I have also seen some cases where they say one building, and they would say one campus as one building. Now a campus could be like 50 acres of campus which has 20 buildings, but they would consider it as one. And they would say, "No, we can only give you 40,000 rupees."
So that is wrong. But what I'm
right.
trying to talk about is why is there such a difference in quality of work?
So
But
it is fairly simple. I think sometimes this has become like a market, and in market people are trying to compete.
But CAs are a market, lawyers are a market, but there's some standardization.
So that standardization has to be driven by two people. One is by the market itself. Then it should say, because in the profession of architecture also there is a process of tendering in which the QCBS system is followed, जिसमें कि आपको 70% वेटेज दिया जाता है पहले आपका क्वालिटी के लिए और 30% वेटेज दिया जाता है आपकी फाइनेंशियल बिड के लिए. तो अनफॉर्चुनेटली अभी इस सेक्टर में वो चीज़ चालू नहीं हुई है. दूसरा चीज़, हमारा क्लाइंट भी इन चीज़ों में अक्सर ये समझता है कि दिस इज़ अ थियोरेटिकल एक्सरसाइज, ये सिर्फ एक कागज़ मिलेगा और कागज़ वाली एक्सरसाइज के लिए द रेंज ऑफ स्पेक्ट्रम ऑफ व्हाट पीपल आर चार्जिंग इज डिफरेंट, बिकॉज there are some people who give it as a full DPS strategy and would want to see कि हमारा ये expectation है क्योंकि client की तरफ से कोई brief नहीं मिला है. So they are going with that kind of a quote, and it could be possible that when they say 7 lakhs or something, that is one. Second thing, there are people who have to provide this consulting with a GST tax, and there are some organizations which are exempted by virtue of being an NGO from the GST tax exemption also, and sometimes these are also practical cost differences which are emerging. I do feel and I do agree that there can be some degree of rationalization if not standardization, but so far no calculation is emerging because इसमें अभी एक challenge और भी है. That challenge is about the transfer of people who are going to come and do this audit. I would say that should be excluded from these costs.
But today, how does one become an accessory auditor? Anybody can become an accessory auditor today, right?
Well, no, I believe the ministry has built in that process to do
to list down people who are auditors.
I think the Ministry of Social Justice in.
But that's based on prior experience. That's not an exam or something that you give.
I believe there is an ongoing program where the Council of Architecture and Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment have entered an MOU.
Oh, fantastic.
And there was a training program which was done for training of the trainers. And I believe there was a test at the end of the whole thing also. And on the basis of that, those people were empaneled. The question actually remains is that this number still cannot suffice for the entire India.
Oh, I think we need something like a bar council or a CA's association or something.
So see, we do have a council of architecture, and if you see it from the lens of architecture, an architect is supposed to undergo so many kinds of trainings within their own school from...
including universal design? Is it mandated?
Well, right now it has kind of come into that position that it is moving in that direction. One should expect every student to be taught this at some stage, but I believe it depends now also on...
But do you think every architect in India knows universal design?
No, I don't think so. While I aspire that everybody should know, but I don't think everybody knows it. And I know people who are already in practice, unless they make a personal effort, they will also not know it.
Right.
For example, and I will tell you one small example, usage of, let's say, ceramic tiles is growing as an industry, right? Now, ceramic tiles are a very critical decision on which you can slip also. You can actually break the principle of tolerance for error goes for a toss sometimes. Now, if the architects are mindful, whether sensitive by reading this or whether by their own way they have acquired this thing, I think the markets will also then intersect in a different way.
I've taken a lot of your time, so I'm going to ask you one last question.
Pleasure.
What do you think can the common citizen of India do to make India an equal opportunity country for people with disabilities?
I would say I would not expect any rocket science from anyone. I would say in whichever position each individual is, they definitely need to do a little bit of introspection and I expect a simple human behavior which I cannot define as a standard, but I would say because what we are doing is simple human behavior, that if there is anybody else who needs anything more than you, please let that person have it, which seems like a very difficult gyan to offer. But I believe just being human, and I must add to this, uh, I respect our nation, our country, because we believe we were a civilization. When I went to Japan for the first time, I saw the kind of courtesies extended to me by unknown citizens, right? And I almost had tears again by a touch, by thinking this was our civilization, that we grew up with those stories. कि आप हमेशा मदद करो, be very empathetic and do all those kind of things. I wish the same behavior and conduct, if this country can retain, sustain and reinvent, which might have been part of the history. It was a very progressive, very inclusive and a very futuristic behavior which needs to sustain. So to kind of sum it up, you would be familiar with a famous saying by Peter Drucker, who said, culture eats strategy for breakfast every morning. I personally feel if our culture of accessibility can come back to us, we would become culturally accessible. Even though infrastructure, information and technology may take their own little time to get that, cultural accessibility should not take that time. And therefore, I feel these conversations, this promotion and this integration and sometimes a little bit spread of this gyan is important, which hopefully rebrings our own culture back to us.
Thank you so much, Professor Reja. I think we've got a lot of gyan from you today.
Thank you, Nipun.
Thank you.